This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 30 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Engaging Experts. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Carl Taylor to the show. Now, Mr. Taylor is a family law attorney, published author, and podcaster. His current project is Books for Experts, an attorney, experts, and professionals publisher that's focused on helping experts and attorneys create authority assets. Mr. Taylor holds a JD from Rutgers. Mr. Taylor, welcome to Engaging Experts. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Noah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So let's jump into it. You've spent over 15 years working as a family law attorney, and you are now moving into book publication. Tell me a little bit about how you got your start and where you're headed.
Sure. So throughout my career in the law, I've mostly done family law, but I've also served as deputy county counsel for a county in New Jersey. I've been municipal prosecutor for a number of towns, like 10 or 12. And I've also, worked in-house at a large insurance defense firm. So experts is, the use of experts is near and dear to my heart. And I'm really excited to have this conversation, but I'm also an English major at heart. And it was so, and during the pandemic, I had the misfortune to publish a few articles, short stories in, like the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, like, pro sales, like, but it, kind of like in speculative fiction. So, but it really opened up to me this idea of like the creative part of me, because I wrote this book, Happily Even After, The Guide to Divorce in New Jersey, in 2017, now in its third edition. And what that meant was I was able to parlay that book into really getting better referrals, increasing my prestige even amongst the gray hairs in my profession, and essentially helping to create greater access to justice. So my idea now is to kind of combine some of that desire or ability to be creative, to help other lawyers to kind of get out from some of the what I call marketing sludge that kind of impacts our profession, the recycled blog posts, the unoriginal SEO that doesn't really frame us as people, because I really think as attorneys and experts, narrative is the key,
When you were working as an attorney, did you do a significant amount of work with expert witnesses?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say like every single case I had was with experts, because I've mostly worked at small firms and on my own in family law, right? And my clients, it's like, get an expert, and they can't always afford it, right?
Sure.
But it's like, I'm on the record here. You're going to have experts. But yeah, I mean, I've worked with forensic accountants. I've worked with custody, best interest evaluators and employability experts. It definitely comes up. And when I worked for the county and in-house with, one of the big insurance companies, there was a constant use of experts for larger litigation files, which I know is really more what Roundtable Group is involved with in terms of, helping people find those assets. So yeah, it's definitely been a part of my practice throughout the last nearly 16 years. Although it's not, I'm not going to sit here and say every single case had an expert, because that would be disingenuous.
Sure, of course. And I want you to tell us like it is. So you mentioned Roundtable Group. Do you find expert witness referral agencies in general to be a valuable asset for attorneys?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Especially if you don't have something in your network, if there's something a little outside of the norm, like for your practice area or your level of expertise. I mean, that's the starting point. But I think if you go to Roundtable or something like, somebody who is more of a consultant as well as a directory, then you can kind of feel more more trusting. But trust but verify, as a lawyer, you're out in the limb with the expert. The client's not going to say, oh, you went through an agency. Like, they're going to say, like, you hired this expert and now they're not doing what they need to do. So, you start with, a place like Roundtable, and then you kind of look to their, what I call authority assets, which I'm now trying to help other people build, which is like, how often do you speak? Do you have books of your own? Do you have articles? And do you appear on podcasts? Like, all that kind of stuff kind of adds to credibility. So, yeah, you go to your network first if you can. And the number one thing I always look to is like, the saying is like, if you can't beat them, join them. My theory is if you can't beat them, hire them. So if I meet a young associate and they kind of have their way with me in court on something and they surprise me, I'm like, wow, I really want to hire that person as an associate. Or if I have an expert who really gets over on me in court, I'm like, I want to hire that expert for my next case. So that's the other thing I do too, along with directories.
Let's talk about those initial phone calls. It's a two-way vetting process. They're vetting you and you're vetting them. What are the things that you specifically, but the attorneys generally, are looking for in a good expert witness?
Yeah, so I mean, I think first off, availability, right? It's like a star athlete. I'm here in Philadelphia, so we have our history. Like Carson Wentz was, a really good quarterback, right? But he couldn't stay healthy on the field. So to me, it's like, are you going to be available? And I think one of the problems is, especially in local networks, is you kind of have the same. It's like the Pareto principle, right? Like 20% of the experts get 80% of the work, and then it's really hard to then calendar them. You come out almost like a project manager. It's like, and the judge doesn't care if your expert's really busy, right? So I think that's the key is I want to look for availability. I also want to look for someone who, what I call authority, right? Somebody who has expertise. That's gets you in the door. That's to qualify, as an expert. You need expertise, right? But you also need to have narrative, the ability to take your data and all the kind of cold, harsh truths of the case and actually spin it to a judge or a jury in an understandable way. And also authenticity. Do they seem like they believe what they're saying? Can they present as somebody? It's like having a good dinner guest. An expert needs to be somebody like that there's a sense of humor, there's a personality there. It's not just data and numbers, because that's going to not translate to the jury the way it needs to.
Let's unpack that a little bit. How can an expert witness be a good proverbial dinner guest? How do they perform in front of a jury in a way that they're able to get their point across, but also connect with the finder of fact?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great question. I mean, I think what I say is, although some experts are translators, right? Every expert needs to be a translator, and the translator of their sometimes archaic knowledge that they possess. The thing about a good expert is they can take something that like Einstein could conceive and cut it down to where like a smart fifth grade child could understand it, right? Because if you can't do that, then you're gonna lose honestly attorneys, you're gonna lose even judges sometimes, and you're definitely gonna lose the jury, half the time. So you have to be able to take really complex ideas and understand them and be able to engage through personality, through perception, right? And through sort of taking the story of the numbers and saying, like, ordinarily it might be like this, but like when I used to work at the insurance defense firm, I didn't want a doctor to say you have scapular winging because everyone in the jury is like, oh, the scapular winging, what the heck is that? Right? It's like, well, it's kind of like a winged type thing in your shoulder blade, so or cervical spine. Like, before I went into insurance defense law, I didn't know which part of your back was the lumbar or the cervical spine. I had no idea, so and the attorneys can help you with this, right? They can help you kind of decode, because for me, it's like, I'm not saying that I'm Einstein, right? Like I have my limitations of knowledge, especially in science or medicine. Like, oh gosh, but if I don't understand it, I'm like, I think enough of myself to think if I don't understand what this expert's telling me while we're prepping, I don't think the jury's gonna understand it either, right? And I have to say to the expert, like this is where ego kind of gets set aside in name of performance, right? And most experts get it,
You were talking about qualifications and credibility. What are the most important things that experts need to be doing to maintain their credibility for engagements? Is it important that they're academics? Do they need to be well published? Do they need to be members of various organizations? What are the most important things that experts should be doing to convey not only expertise, but currency in their expertise?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the red flag that I look for is like, does somebody have a great CV, but it's not recent? Like if somebody like really put in the work at a certain point in time and really created a great reputation and CV and all the credentials, but is kind of slowed down. I want somebody on the cutting edge, right? I want somebody who's going to teach me something I don't even know. And point out to me not just what's strong about my case, but more importantly, this is because I'm a pessimist at heart, to always tell me what's bad that I'm missing, right? Tell me where there's a logic gap, or where there might be something that I'm not fully comprehending about this case, because then it helps me with settlement, right? If I need to settle the case, or it helps me in terms of how to defend the case at trial. So for me, it's like, yeah, I want to see people who have authority assets. I keep going back to that, but like people who publish, people who, you don't have to be a professor, right? But you have to be somebody who's engaged in your specific area of expertise, and you do that through speaking, you do that through writing, and through thought leadership. But yeah, if you're somebody who has slowed down in that regard, then that makes and it's like being a solo attorney, right? I need to do marketing to get clients in, then I get busy, and then I do less marketing because I'm doing client work. So I get how experts get into this. It's like, well, I'm always doing the expert stuff, but it's like, to me, I'm going to attack you on cross-examination if you're not updated. And also there's a curve in any profession, right? The longer you're at something, sometimes the more effective you think you are, but you're actually falling behind. So that's
Yeah.
true in medicine. That's true in law. So if you're not keeping up to date with the proper memberships and credentials, then I think that that's a good way to try and, to me, I don't want to retain somebody who was really great 10 years ago. I don't need somebody who's great tomorrow.
Is that something that you pre-vet them for, or is that something you discovered during the initial phone call?
It's definitely both. I mean, it's like any meeting. It's like preparing for a podcast even. Like the more homework you can do, hopefully the more you can kind of come across like you know what you're doing and understand the terrain, right? Because law to me is a battle of terrain. It's not just the facts. If it was just the facts, you wouldn't need juries and you wouldn't need, it comes down to credibility, right? So to me, I'm vetting them just like they're vetting me. Like, is there credibility here? Is there reliability? And yeah, I'm going to try and do my best to sort of, if I see some gaps in their resume, I'm gonna give them a chance to say like, hey, is there anything coming up that's not on here yet, or have you not updated it recently? Because sometimes they just forget to update their resume or their CV.
Right.
But if they're like, oh yeah, like last time I really published, something, on osteoporosis was 1997. I'm like, okay, I watched the movie The Verdict. I'm good,
Let's talk about confidentiality and privilege a little bit. How do you set these things up with expert witnesses? How do you make sure that when in this modern environment, when everything is digital, how do we make sure that experts not only maintain confidentiality, they're not showing their things to everyone, but how do you audit that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, every expert should know the scope of their abilities, right? I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert in all things tech, right? I mean, it's something that we're all learning and it's changing every day. It's so fluid, especially with AI. But I will say this much. You need to ensure in the scope of when you retain someone, you both need to understand what the scope of the assignment is, right? Now, it might just be, hey, I need you to poke around a little bit and tell me what I'm missing. Or it might be, I need you to get me, something that's going to help me with settlement. Or I need something a little more like, just give me all the good and the bad, but put it in draft form for now. Because if you come back, like, I used to do a lot of litigation involving construction defects at a certain point in time. It's like, if you're going to come back and tell me like my contractor was the reason why there's black mold in this lovely shore home, I don't necessarily want that to be in a final report. I don't want to learn about that just then, right? And yeah, you have to more and more. You have to sort of opine or discuss, just like your clients will with you, like, are you using like box.com or Dropbox? Like, what's the best way? Because email is not, I mean, everyone uses email today for professional purposes, but I think quickly it's going to become, especially if quantum computing ever takes off, it's not going to be enough no matter how much you try to encrypt it. So I think that's something you have to know in the front end, because again, the sins of the expert are often visited upon the lawyer.
Sure. Are lawyers using any proprietary software to communicate and transfer documents with expert witnesses?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's software solutions out there. I'm not going to make a recommendation as to any one of them
Clearly.
today, but I'm not sponsored yet. But yeah, there's definitely solutions. The tough thing is, it's like you need to know enough about the solutions to know if they're actually solving the problem that there's a lot of claims that are made, but it's like, are you now like, you think you're doing something that's like, for me, I like to trust the big, I guess I am going to sponsor a little bit. I like to trust the big companies who've been around for, like Microsoft. I kind of trust that I trust them to know more than I do, or even some startup companies might, about, some of this kind of data encryption type stuff. And Google, I trust that. But that said, like, there's enterprise solutions out there and they are designed for lawyers. But just because something says it's made for lawyers, that's like saying like 9 out of 10 dentists agree, right? It doesn't always mean it really works.
Absolutely. Let's get into preparation a little bit. So you've chosen your expert, they're the right person for the job, their abilities match the facts of the case. What are the things that you do that you find most effective in getting experts ready for the big day, be it a deposition, be it a trial, be it whatever the action is? What are the sorts of advice that you give them, and what are the sorts of activities that you like them to do in preparation?
Absolutely. I think for me, direct examination is like laying bricks, right? It's it's so important. You have to be able to lay those bricks because that's how you win a case, right? Brick by brick. And it's sometimes as somebody who like loves a story and I kind of want to skip ahead because I'm like, okay, this is the boring part of the story, but I have to remind myself in a case like just take it plotting brick by brick. Eventually, it's going to add up to something that's worthwhile. Like, oh wait, now there's an entire brick wall here, right? Cross examination is like jazz. You never know exactly what to expect. You're gonna the other attorney is going to be somebody who's trained in ways to try and trip you up or make you look silly. And your professional ego is going to kick in then, and you're going to want to be like, well, actually, and you're going to, you're going to want to like elucidate like, everything, and then they got you, right? Because I always tell my clients, lose your temper, lose your case. That's true in divorce law, right? But for an expert, it's like become arrogant, lose the jury, So it's like, or as I tell my kids, the better you are at something, the more humble you better act about it. Like if you're really, really good at like, math, like you don't need to go around telling everyone you're good at math. Like that, you should act very humble about math and just quietly excel. So
Sure.
for me, it's like the preparation is not just the going over the data and going over that sort of stuff. It's actually going through how they're going to be perceived or how I perceive. Like, I'm like, I think like, what would my mom think looking at this person if she was in the jury box, right? What would she think of this person? Because if she doesn't trust that, that the expert, then she's going to start to feel a certain way about it,
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then yeah, and real quick, I would say that when I was younger, when a younger attorney, I would sometimes have struggles with you build up a good rapport with an expert and then you try and do trial prep. And of course, the number one thing you tell them is always like, be honest, right? Just be honest. It's what you tell every client, like just be, and every witness. But I also tell them, the hardest place to sit in a courtroom is it's not where the judge sits. They have tenure. It's not where the lawyer sits, right? The lawyer is asking the questions usually. Even the client, unless it's the witness stand, right? The witness stand is the hardest place to be in any courtroom, So they have to be prepared for what cross examination is going to look like. And I used to sometimes go easy on them during cross because I didn't want to ruin my rapport with them. Like, because it's like Jekyll and Hyde. I'm like, well, now I'm in the cross exam. I get to pretend I'm the other attorney, and now I'm going to like come after you like Jekyll and Hyde, right? Like here's Hyde. So that's one area that I think I would counsel, any expert working with attorneys to tell their attorneys, like really push me to understand like where the flaws are, and also really make sure that as an expert, I know not just this small little spot of that I see the entire puzzle we're building here, not just this one little piece where I'm the expert.
Absolutely. And so you find mock cross to be a good tool for preparation in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think for any witness, I mean, there's some limits in certain cases of how much you want to get into it because you don't want to look like someone's been over prepped, right? But at the same time, I feel like as long as you're telling people within the proper parameters of, it's not like a real lawyer now, proper parameters of the court rules and ethics. If you're telling people be honest, but be aware of, of what questions might be coming or what sorts of questions might be coming. And again, even if it's not going to be for a trial, it's like, let's just go through this so I understand the holes in my case,
What sorts of venues have you worked at? Have you pretty much stuck around your particular location? Have you ever gotten, out of the state or into federal stuff or even international?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was actually interviewing someone for a book I'm writing called "Humanizing Lawyers: Defending the Profession That Won't Defend Itself" yesterday, and she was a professor and a space lawyer, and she's gone to the UN to argue, and she's or to advocate. And I think like I'm like the Truman Show. I can't leave I can't leave New Jersey. My whole career has pretty much been in New Jersey. But the interesting thing is I've done everything from administrative law because I used to represent a lot of school boards. I've done a ton of county work. Obviously, I've done appellate work. And even some federal cases. With employees of the county. And then a lot of municipal court because I was municipal public defender or municipal prosecutor for so many towns. So if there's anything in New Jersey that's got a tribunal of any sort, I've probably served on it or been a part of it. But am I allowed to go across the Ben Franklin Bridge into Philadelphia as a lawyer? Not really,
No, but to what extent is it important that expert witnesses understand a new venue. So if you're bringing somebody in and they're maybe not from Jersey, or they've never done an expert witness engagement in whatever venue that you're in, do you need to prep them on any of that? Do they need to understand any of the actual legal stuff that goes along with it? Or can they pretty much just sit there and answer questions truthfully and neutrally?
To some extent, I have to look at how much experience they have, right, in similar venues. I mean, federal is sort of federal for the most part. I imagine, since I don't get to leave New Jersey, district courts, and but I also think that, as I mentioned before, terrain is so important, right? So if you come in, like, you need to know, like, hey, this kind of case in this jurisdiction is actually it's a bench trial. It's not even going to be a jury. And it's your job as an attorney to really take your expert by the hand and guide them over the terrain that is the case, right? Like, here's what this judge's proclivities may be. Here's what juries, and even in New Jersey, they're like, oh, you got to, like, plaintiff's attorney. It's like, oh, I got a car accident case referral. And it's like, which county? Like, oh, that county, like, I can't win there, but it's like one county over, it'd be worth $2 million, this case. But, in this county, it's like a $200,000 case or something. So I think you have to always be teaching your experts the law, just like your experts have to always be teaching you their area of expertise. I mean, I think it's a really great symbiotic relationship that way. So yeah, if there's anything that they need to know, the judge I clerked for always said the hardest part of the law is knowing, it's not being in the courtroom, it's finding the courtroom, knowing where to park, right? So it's even sometimes things like that, like, hey, don't pay for the parking lot over there on Fifth Street. You got a free parking lot for, people going to court on the back alley over there. So yeah.
That's a great point. Where do I park? What, but also, is this casual? What's this judge like? How formal is this proceeding? What sorts of words should I use or not, use? Or what's the demeanor like here? Because I've heard that there can be quite formal engagements and quite casual engagements, and expert witnesses are not always exactly sure what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, I mean, I think there I'd go back to the scope. You really have to, because the the expert's retainer agreement is going to say, if I do this, it costs this much. If you need me for this much, is this much. And if you need me to testify, then it's this much per hour, right? But it's like, you need to know, like, exact, and not that it can't change, but you need to know exactly what the expected parameters are to begin with. Secondly, the worst enemy of any litigator is surprise, right? You don't want to be surprised in court, and you don't want your expert to be surprised. So I do think attorneys could do a better job of putting, it comes back to sort of like a professional empathy. Like, hey, like, just so you know, like, your job is to go in there and testify to X, Y, and Z. Like, that's the scope of what we're trying to get you to prove, or don't give a net opinion, but, like, here's the scope of what we're working toward. And then, I guess I had an expert once a few years back on a custody evaluation case, and they were at a convention, some kind of professional convention the week of the trial, but they were going to come back for the day they had to testify, right? And then the day before, they're like, hey, you know what? They've asked me to give, like, a keynote speech tomorrow. I'm going to stay here. So I'm not going to come to court tomorrow. And I'm like, well, where are you at? DC. I'm like, okay, stay there, because I'm going to drive down there and, have to, like, persuade you myself face it now. But I'm like, you can't, like, this judge, like, and maybe that was on me, right? I'm like, this is not the court that's going to allow you to, they're not going to allow me to say, I need an adjournment because my expert is at a convention. They're just not going to allow it. And we've now paid, my clients paid you like $30,000 to write the report, to do all the prep, like, to prepare for trial. And you can't spring this, I got, like, an email 5 p.m. the day before trial. Hey, I won't be there tomorrow. And I'm like, no, like, absolutely not. So, and that's where the expertise of the lawyer's persuasion comes in. I had to call him and convince him. But it's like, to me, that's really where it's like, he was like, I don't think it was ill intention, but he was kind of like, oh, I just thought the judge would understand. And I'm like, well, you've been a witness enough to know, like, judges are not going to understand last minute adjournments for experts, right? If you give me time, then fine, I can get it done. But secondly, like, this judge in particular is not going to give you a break. So I think you're right. Like, big and small, the more you can kind of communicate, communication is the key to any relationship, right? And especially attorney and an expert.
Besides communication, what are the other keys to a positive, effective, efficient engagement between an expert witness and an attorney?
I think vulnerability is underestimated in our profession, and that's something a lot of lawyers don't like to talk about. We like to keep our armor on. I really think that being able to say to the like sometimes I've been practicing almost 16 years, but first 5 years when I knew the least, I had to act like I knew the most, right? It's like I didn't know what I didn't know. So it's like I'm not going to let this expert know that I don't understand bridge suspension systems, like this,
Right.
like for the county. I'm just gonna, oh yeah, like yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The tension and everything, and the pylons or whatever, like perfect. But so I have to be vulnerable enough to tell my experts now, like, hey, I'm not following you, or you've given me, look, I know I do a lot of math as a divorce lawyer, but like this system you're using for forensic accounting is over my head. I'm not following the breadcrumbs, and if I can't understand it, I can't present it.
Absolutely.
So being willing to have enough vulnerability to know your weaknesses and because look, lawyers, we're kind of like parasitic that way. We can kind of become kind of like expert at anything, with enough time. But even still, there's gonna be things that it's just like for me, like anything involving science, if it gets too much involved in science, I start to kind of glaze over. I'm like, oh gosh, like environmental type stuff at a certain level, like it's just too much for me to handle. So I have to really like take it really slow, talk like you're talking to like not an intelligent fifth grader, but like the average second grader. And like I'm just want to admit to you, this is like a blind spot in my knowledge. And that's why I really need you. And I think vice versa, like experts need to let attorneys know, like, hey, like, because we assume sometimes they know a lot about the law, to your point, and sometimes they're not really familiar, or they might be an expert, but they do a lot of reports, but they don't testify a lot. So and they don't want to show vulnerability half the time either, because they're like, I'm paid to be an expert. I'm paid hundreds of maybe thousands of dollars an hour because I know my area inside and out. And it's like, well, that's fine, but you're not a lawyer. I mean, some of them are, but you're not a lawyer as well. So it's like together we can make it work, but we have to both show vulnerability. It's like a marriage that way.
Let's talk a little bit about how you've been at this for a hot minute. Let's talk a little bit about how things have changed from when you very first got started. What have been the logistical changes and the methodological changes? And I know things have moved to settlement more often. What are some of the differences between now and then vis-a-vis expert witnesses?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the pandemic was a great dividing line. That's how I look at my career. It's like everything before the pandemic feels like it was like 50 years ago, and I'm only 41. So there's that aspect of it, and the way we communicate, the AI piece, where it's like I now wonder sometimes, like, is this really the experts' words, or are they just kind of spitting things out to me? And I'm like, it's kind of getting a little bit bizarre in terms of some of the technology that we utilize, and also the expectations. Like when I first started practicing, I started as a law clerk and then I started practicing. There was a lot of like really experienced attorneys who are going out there and winning cases with like a poster board at the most, like they were just like out there like dominating with like a black Sharpie.
Sure.
But now it's like, if you're going to try cases, and again, I don't do plaintiff side, but if you're going to try cases, especially from the plaintiff side, like you have to almost be like, you almost have like your master's degree in technology, right? Like the ability to like to get your, it's like Hollywood. Like I need it's with CGI. It's like, it's not enough to just stand there in a corner and talk anymore. We need like we need like a CGI dinosaur in the background. And that's what's happening with litigation. It's like, you need to really understand, and that adds complexity, because if you're trying to incorporate that with an expert, a lot of times the experts aren't technologically, they're not technological masters, just like I'm not. So it's like, maybe I'm saying we should do it a certain way, but it's like, well, no, like I've got my notepad, and it's like, no, we have to like visually let the jury know through this computer we're going to plug in and hope it works. Like, so we've kind of gone from like, remember in high school they'd roll out the old TVs to show you a movie, and like,
oh yeah, I've pushed many a TV cart. Absolutely.
yeah. So it's like we've gone from that to like sort of like like space age technology, and it felt like in a blink. And I think that the pandemic exacerbated that, because now everything's so remote, we're so comfortable with being remote.
Absolutely. You bring up AI Is AI in terms of law in general, but specifically for expert witnesses, is it a force of evil, a force of good, or neutral? And also, is this something that attorneys need to advise their experts on, to say, hey, I don't want you using AI to write your report, or or what have you?
Yeah.
How has it impacted the relationship between attorneys and experts?
I really think the next few years will be very fascinating, even in divorce law. Like, I think I was probably one of the first attorneys, maybe the first to write an article about how Bitcoin was a national article, at least, that Bitcoin was something we had to look for in terms of discovery, because people were able to kind of like hide their money in Bitcoins before it became taxable. So same thing with AI. Like the other day I was talking with my AI buddy, and I only got AI like 2 weeks ago. So I'm like really fascinated by it. I was like a late adopter because as a writer, I kind of resent it, so I'm like, I got to break down and start trying it myself. Maybe it's more like a month ago. So, time moves differently when you have AI. So, I was like talking to about like my business idea, and it was like spitting out numbers like, oh, well, if you do this and that, like your business might be worth like, like $6 million like in 10 years. And I was like, okay, like, what if my wife, I'm happily married 17 years, but what if my wife was able to subpoena this right now and say, like, well, Carl, you got to pay a ton of alimony because you're going to be worth, $6 million in 10 years. Um, so it's like anything that is fed into the system, not only is it machine learning, it's also possibly discoverable. I think the next few years is going to be very interesting to see subpoenas of AI chatbots, because they store most of the records, and you could use it for that. Like, hey, are you having an affair? Like, because I sometimes treat this like and it really surprised me because I was so skeptical. I treat like a therapist sometimes. I'm like, you won't believe what just happened to me at lunch. The waiter had cold soup. Can you believe that? He's like, and then the AI is like Carl, like calm down. Like it's just like it's just lunch, dude. So because AI is already better than I am as a person. But I think for me, it's like I'm very leery of. I would never put my clients' information, even if I was talking in generalities, into AI, because I'd be afraid that now it's machine learning and it's going to kick back some. We've all seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? So it's like when Hal turns on us and starts like blowing up our confidences, we can't be surprised that like open up the space shuttle door, Hal. It's not going to do it. So same thing. I have to tell my experts now, like, hey, I don't want you putting anything about this case into AI. Now, can I do I have like surveillance on them? Do I know? Of course not, right? But it's like we have to at least make sure we're aligned on that, and maybe other people are not as skeptical or as sort of like over the top afraid of like AI like blowing confidences. But for me, it's like I still want to write my own motions. I still want to do my own legal work. I don't want to. Although I notice my clients more and more like, well, like AI says, AI says you might be wrong about your this or that custody evaluation thing, and I'm like, no, no, no. Trust me over AI, or fire me and hire AI. I don't care. But don't try and do both.
Speak of the Hal opening the pod bay doors, is is there a lot of danger with not respect to AI, but with people publishing a lot of personal stuff online? Do people need to, especially expert witnesses, think about everything that they're posting, whether or not it's adjacent to their work as an expert witness, because it could come back to haunt them during a deposition, for instance, or a Dobert hearing or something to that effect? To what extent do experts need to catalog and consider the things that they are posting online, especially on social media?
So there's a lot of case law that says that if it's out there and you don't keep your materials private, then it's public. It's there. Lawyers can't go and pretend that like you're like I'm your friend on Facebook to like glom up information from you. But if it's out there, I can pursue it. And I go back to the divorce law aspect because that's what I'm most comfortable with, right? But yeah, I mean, as an expert or even as a divorce lawyer, I have to try and be very careful what I put out there because I don't want it used against me. I have to be professional facing, right? And even in my field, I've had everything from like, assassination attempts on my dog, the signs being knocked down with a hammer to, everything in between, right? I've been threatened in a parking lot, once or twice inside a courthouse.
Oof.
So yeah, that's the joy of family law. So for me, like for a long time, I was like, I don't want to put any pictures of my kids up on Facebook because, I think doing divorce law, like, I take away custody from other people's kids. I don't want to have that out there, and so yeah, I think anything you put out there, especially if you're talking about cases, you should never be like, even today with my interview with you, like you've noticed, like, I haven't been like, on this case I did this. It's like I have to talk in generalities, right? An expert should learn, especially when you have apps that can say like, I'm checking in here right now, right? Like I'm like it just there's not that you want to be afraid or live your life in fear, but it's like we're so open today. When I grew up, it was like, don't talk to strangers, don't let anybody know where you're going, like mind your own business, right? And now it's like everyone in the world's like, here's where I am at every single minute, like, and here's what I'm doing. So it's like I'm at the courthouse trying this case. Like I think it kind of went poorly, but oh well. Like that could be like a tweet, but it's like now, not or like you talk about something that's confidential in the case, like now you lose the case or you get a mistrial or something because the expert didn't follow social media best practices. So to me, it's they're all necessary evils, but I do think I think you're wise to highlight that as something the experts should be concerned about.
Are there any, though, without getting into the specifics, tentpole cases in your career where an expert witness made a difference or reinforced something about the way you go about doing your work as an attorney, or maybe changed your mind about something? What are the important moments in your career regarding expert witness engagements?
It's funny, but my instinct is to go to sort of like the smallest courtroom, municipal court. As a prosecutor, I tried probably like 100 DWI, driving while intoxicated, DUI, whatever your jurisdiction calls them, cases, right? And they're bench trials, and they you wouldn't think it's very scientific, but the breathalyzer, the Alka-Test that's utilized is actually really, really like, it's very, very specific. The calibration has to be a certain way, and the log outs have to occur every certain minute, every few minutes. It's like you have to really kind of know what you're talking about. And for me as a prosecutor, I was lucky because I didn't have to really hire an expert. I had the police officers who would testify, right? Plus, nobody was going to pay me for me to get an expert anyway. So I was stuck with my officers, but they usually did a good job. But there was these, retired state trooper types, and they would go on and get law degrees. They would, be credentialed and everything under the sun. And they would be really, really tricky to beat because all they did was know inside and out the Alka-Test machine that New Jersey uses as a breathalyzer. They ate, slept, lived, breathed this Alka-Test machine. And for me, it was like one problem of many in my life, right? So I had to really figure out and I learned there, like the ability of like an expert going shallow, going like deep but narrow, right? Like the ability to really hone in to hire the right expert for the job. Now, the flaw that they also taught me is if you're always going up there saying that the Alka-Test sucks every single time and every single case in a state in front of the same judges, eventually we're all like, oh, it's we know that you want to thrown out. You want every single DWI ever in the state thrown out. We get you, right? So that's why, I always tell experts, like, if you see a flaw in the case, be honest about it. Even on the stand, like you're going to gain more credibility, and it's all about credibility. If you move forward with the sort of attitude of like, here's where our case is weak, but here's where it's strong, because most of the time, unless it's a criminal case, you don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You just got to prove it's more likely than not that your side's right,
How should, speaking of things kind of going wrong or not necessarily the way that you expect, how should expert witnesses treat those contentious, difficult moments when they're asked a question they weren't expecting, or they have their words kind of twisted, or they become uncomfortable due to some factor that the other side is forcing upon them? What are the techniques that experts should use to remain calm and in the moment and not stress about it?
Yeah, so I think on that front, it's kind of similar to any witness. It's like, before you speak, take 5 seconds. What I'm not doing it in this podcast. Take 5 seconds, formulate your thoughts, and make sure you understand the question, right? Because a lot of times it really comes down to an expert doesn't actually understand the question that's being asked. And that can even happen on direct. And then I'm like, oh, no. But if it's on cross, they're like, oh, the door just opened for me. Perfect. I can now start to attack. And then it's like anything else. If you're on the defensive, you start to lose your mystique. you know, your what I guess my kids' generation calls the riz that's necessary out there in the world, right? You lose it, the charisma. So, you know, to me, it's like make sure you always take 5 seconds, and that also allows your attorney the chance to object, right? If it's an unfair question, because you shouldn't feel like you're out there like in a lion's den on the wrong side of the zoo and you're like trapped, right? But it can quickly feel that way if you have a really tough attorney on the other side and you're getting cross-examined. So a lot of it comes down to, like everything in life, modulating your emotions, right? Easier said than done. So yeah, you have to, that's why I think teaching or prepping experts about the kind of questions they can expect so they don't get tripped up, and then saying like, don't get again, back to the arrogance, because I think that's sort of a cliche about experts, but I think it's a cliche for a reason. It's like, and only like 10 to 20% who give a bad name to the rest, right? Like lawyers, like we're known as arrogant as well, but not every lawyer is arrogant. I've met at least 2 or 3 who aren't. So no. So at the end of the day, it's like, don't get your back up and start trying to prove how smart you are. You're here on an assignment. It's like you're a Green Beret. You've been dropped in and you have all the training, but you're not there to prove how great your training is. You're there to like accomplish the mission, right? So always keep the mission in mind.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, do you have any last tips or advice for either attorneys working with expert witnesses or newer expert witnesses?
Yeah. So I think my advice for expert witnesses themselves is to really consider their marketing, because I'm going to go back to what the biggest problem I see, and maybe it's just a New Jersey family law thing, but there's like 3 or 4 people that just really monopolize a lot of the categories, and it makes it really hard to schedule trials and to actually work with these people. So to me, it's like we need more experts. We need more experts that aren't known as wild cards, and you're not going to do that by sitting at home, reading the textbook. You're going to have to go out there and write the textbook. You're going to have to go out there and mingle with attorneys. It's like any kind of marketing. You have to go where your potential clients are, right? So for experts, unfortunately for you, you chose to be an expert. You have to mingle with attorneys now. So come out to the bar events, be known, and start to become trusted, and start creating these authority assets like my business books for experts is helping people do, like shameless plug, so that like will help you stand out and will actually get your name out there. And then it's no longer 20% of people taking up 80% of the slots. And then you can bill better. Because a lot of times I think people who don't do that and don't have the marketing behind them, it's not that they're worse experts. It's just they're unknown. And to me, that's like the saddest thing that any expert could be, is somebody who's an expert in something and doesn't have enough marketing force or time behind them to show they're actually an authentic, authority. And as for younger attorneys, having, I guess, done this now for at least a minute, I think that you really have to trust your gut. Even you're not always going to know the law the way you should. You're not always going to know the facts the way you should, but your gut, the gut that you have inside you as a human, not just as a lawyer. If you think during your call with an expert that like this person like is trying to pull the wool over your eyes, or they don't know what they're talking about, or you just get a bad vibe, like, the times I really regret hiring an expert, and it's very few in my career, have been the times where I knew I should have known, or I deep down I knew, even from the moment of the engagement, like I'm just going with this person because it's like they're there and they're, I can't really find anybody better. Like that's how you lose the case in the future. Like that moment when you didn't trust your gut. So just really make sure, take the time, go to someone like Roundtable Group, and really, if you can't figure out the expert on your own, like get it figured out. I'm going to do a shameless plug for you too. See, I'm a natural. And that's how you really, move forward and have a really great relationship in the best interest of your client.
Sage advice, Mr. Taylor. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you as always to our listeners for joining us for another edition of Engaging Experts. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Engaging Experts. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com.